Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager and an emerging leader, thus a leadership enthusiast.
We're doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, leadership decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show to look at how leadership is all around us. And even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and in the opportunities around us.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers. In this episode, we're talking about Season 2, Episode 7, Down the Mississippi, and Episode 8, The Collector. Let's jump in.
So we're back to some sense of somewhat normalcy, whatever is normal for this group. We're in Season 2, Episode 7, Down the Mississippi. So Murphy has given Lucy to a family to raise. We still have Vasquez, but Cassandra's no longer there. And so now in this episode, a lot of decisions have to be made. And it's interesting to start to see where people's loyalty to each other starts and ends. So what were some of your takeaways?
I guess initially, right, they find that boat that they, need to get down the mighty Mississippi, as I like to say. And they're, things go awry. They run into some zombies. The group gets separated. Everyone's together except for 10K. And I think that Doc, obviously, very attached to 10K, right? They have a really strong bond in the group. And he wants to go try to find him. And Warren wants to continue down the path. And I think she does a pretty good job of they explain to Doc, like, hey, we had this agreement for this rally point, and if we got separated, it's just because he went to the other side of the river. We'll stay close to the river. We'll go up ahead. We'll continue down. If we don't find him, or if he doesn't find us, we'll double back, right? So she gives like very clear cut, like, this is what we're gonna do, in this situation, and if this happens, we'll do this. And it's very clear. And even though Doc is hesitating, I think that she's proven time and time again that she has everyone's best intentions in mind. So he's willing to continue down. And I think that just shows like how powerful the leader she's, how much trust she's gained in the team so far.
I think, yeah, because I think it's Vasquez who wants to just leave 10K and just keep moving. But yeah, Warren is that in between. And again, she does something here where she gives them a time. Like, we'll spend 24 hours looking for 10K. That's how, so it's trying to set this realistic expectation of, like you said, here's the things we're going to do, the places we're going to go to do that. And here's how much time we're going to give that, because it can't be like an indefinite type of thing. And yeah, his, like you said, Doc's conviction with trying to find 10K, we discover over this episode just how strong that is. So not only is he able to, like you said, like Warren does want to continue forward too, but because of Doc's conviction also, she puts just a slight pin in that for just a minute to, take care of the team, take care of who's there, accepting, kind of like the different perspectives that they have. And then, still having that way to move forward. But Doc's conviction in how loyal he is to his teammates, specifically to 10K in this episode, I think is something that you don't see very often on teams, but it can be like the cause of why somebody leaves a company and then takes other people with them, right? Or anything like that, where it's like, there's just sometimes this loyalty that people feel to each other for whatever that connection is. Again, like we talked in previous episodes, you connect with people for different reasons on an emotional level. And whatever those reasons are, sometimes they can stand the test of time and companies and all of that. And sometimes they don't. Doesn't mean that anyone's more or less valuable. It's just that, like, who you connected to and when.
Yeah, that's great points. Because the other thing that I thought was interesting about this is because or during that separation, we run into Skeezy and Sleazy, right? Which are two, like, they're not team members, right? It's just that Doc happens to know them from a past life. So they have like this level of like credibility, right? Because if they're good enough for Doc, they're like good enough for everyone, so to speak. what I think is really interesting is 10K runs into them, and because 10K and Doc have such a strong relationship, 10K sort of goes along with them, right? So he finds them and he feels somewhat like safe or comforted in their, or maybe that's a bit extreme. I apologize. But like he goes along with them. 10K, Doc knows him. They know Doc. 10K knows Doc. It's just like this shared relationship with this one link that built this, that they can move forward. And then when they run into those folks and they go through that whole bit of like, this is the Murphy and, he'll bite you and make you appear from zombies, that whole thing. Like there's like this play along with it. And I think that's really cool. Right. And that's kind of those like minds, like personalities can work well together. Not like that, but I mean like goals can work together well.
It's interesting too, because I think there's an element of kind of going along with it, but then also an element of their salesman vibe and tactics didn't allow anybody to disagree.
That's a very valid
Like it
point.
didn't give 10K a voice in any way. And anytime he tried to even kind of like say like, oh no, I need to go back and look for my friends. Oh, another story, another distracting thing. So that he went along with them instead of actually being an active, like choosing to go with them. It was more that it was just by default that they just kind of kept talking and kept talking so that he didn't have a chance to voice what he wanted.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean. They're kind of just they're part of the show. They're part of the culture. They're part of what are shaping the team. I think like from an entertainment perspective, I enjoy their like used carsman sale vibe or used car salesman vibe. Put the emphasis on the wrong syllable there, but I like yeah, that's a really good point because now 10K is he's not going to be able to see the team. He's not going to help himself be found. So yeah, I guess that's a really good point. But I think my favorite thing about this is since they're traversing the United States, they're running into like different like cultures and stuff, right? And I think that's really interesting for teams, especially with like how global, especially with remote work and the ability for people to live in different places and work for a company that before they never would have been able to. I think it's really interesting from like a leadership perspective of your work. Most of the, I wouldn't say always, but I think people tend to stay like I live on the East Coast. I grew up on the East Coast. I probably will never live or move away from the East Coast. And a lot of people on the East Coast have very similar understandings, values, that kind of thing as that are not super different, but slightly different from people who live in like the Midwest or the West Coast. And so I really think it's interesting, like from a leadership perspective, that they're running into all these other like culturally acceptable norms. And Warren and the team have to navigate through that and figure out how to get the buy-in from these people that they need the help of to like continue their mission forward. So I think that that's always like super interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because
Just
like,
thinking.
oh yeah, no, because I was gonna say, because like later on, in the episode when they come across that like town, so to speak, of like zombie free, where they have their own power because they're using zombies to like spin the generator wheel and everything like that. Like that is its own little society, right? And it's like kind of old fashioned in my opinion. Like even the like town leader guy is wearing like a leisure suit from the 70s. So it's kind of like a visual cue that these values are running different to like the current culture, which to their mind is counterculture, right? So it's like very traditional, and they have like this little family unit thing, and they have these little fights to let people's minds wander, right? These like zombie fights or whatever, and they have like that gallows standing there. So it's like this weird old-fashioned law and order thing. And when the team comes in and they're trying to get their people together and round everything up, like it's like these two different leadership, two different team style, two different value systems like coming to a head. And you're never going to get their buy-in for them to believe in your mission, so to speak. But it's like, how do you make them not a brick wall and more like just an obstacle and not like a dead stop? And I thought like that whole thing was like really interesting because Warren, I think, navigates it really well. And Vasquez also helps like with his strengths. So like everyone has to come together to like find the common thread and the common good in that.
I agree. I think there's another piece too, now that I'm thinking about it. of when Doc is getting so upset about leaving 10K behind. And him and Vasquez start to fight.
Yeah.
And so then Warren jumps in between them and she's like, settle down to both, but she pulls Doc aside and she says to him, don't let this take you down. Like, don't let this be the thing, right? Because again, like this team has come together, fallen apart, come together, fallen apart so many times that this could just be another blip. But that even kind of going into those other things, like what you were just saying, where it's like, as they encounter these different things, is this a distraction or is this something that is useful to moving this forward? So what are we really focusing on as a group and as we move through things?
Yeah, I kind of like, I glossed over the conflict between Doc and Vasquez. Like, I didn't even really think about that. That's like a really good point, because it's that internal team struggle, and it's also, yeah, Warren having to like break that up. I think it's also interesting that the person who she pulled to the aside was Doc. You know, like that's pretty interesting and telling as well. Huh. Yeah. But I think the other thing that's kind of crazy is once they're in that town, right, and they're going to do that that legal battle, who sits as the judge but El Scorpion. So like, I again, like, super interesting when you talk about like that that leadership through fear, right? Or like that he just sort of has that power. And I think like that's a really interesting aspect to all this. And ultimately he doesn't care about anybody or anything. He doesn't care about what's right or wrong. He cares more that he's seen as the guy who decides what's right and wrong. And I think that's really, really interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how he is, I mean, terrible example of leadership, of course, but I like how he is showing up at these like different pressure points for the team to really show that like the other extreme of guiding people through something is this fear and force. Even though he has this very calm demeanor, the way he's going about this is wildly counterproductive to actually getting people on board with something.
Yeah, I like him like existing within this though, because I also think, I can't speak for everyone, but I don't run into like drug cartel leaders that I work with very often, if ever. You don't know what you don't know. But I do run into like kind of bad leaders like that all the time, right? I do run into folks who sort of lead by fear, right? Like the veiled threats of firings or like meet the deadline or else. So like he can kind of like ease, it's an extreme, but it's also the zombie apocalypse. So but like I like watching them interact with like sort of avoid, right, or not let his bad leadership get in the way of their good leadership or their mission. Like I think that's like really, really interesting. And I think there's a lot you can pull from that, right? So it's like they humor it to a point so that it doesn't stop their overall workflow.
And it absolutely, and I think it's not even about humoring it, but just accepting that there are other styles available in this world, and other people are going to use those styles. And the best thing that you can do to show that that's not effective or to quote unquote fight against that is to be so good at what you're doing, right? Is to show like leadership in this very compassionate and wise and kind way of being a leader. And in doing that, like the results will speak for themselves. These team members, when lost, try to find their way back. They fight their way back to Warren and to this mission. And so, whereas with other leaders, you might not find that. They'd either be actively leaving, or if they happen to get away, they'd stay away. So it's always really interesting when I hear people who are just very upset and frustrated by the fact that certain people are in different leadership positions and, they're not a good leader or whatever. And that is super unfortunate, right? And it is also reality. And so what can we do? Be better. And I don't want to be like, oh, whenever they go low, we go high. Like it's not always about that, but it is about like, but you, like you're saying, you getting caught up on this, you getting caught up on what type of a leader they are, is taking this mental and emotional energy away from the leader that you're trying to be. So focus in on who it is and what it is that you want to be, that, and that is what will ultimately make other people's lives better. Unless your whole life's mission as a leader is to take down these other leaders, then you're wasting your time. You're wasting your energy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you can also see like that El Scorpion's a bad leader in this because like even his job as like judge, he's basically solely off of the volume of the applause, right? Like it's a popularity contest. So like whether he thinks somebody's argument was valid or invalid is solely based off of that. And I think you can run into that too, where the leader's not making the decision, right? He's just sort of doing whatever he thinks or she thinks is going to make her most popular amongst the workforce. And that's one where, you know, that's pretty telling as well. Because in my experience working with folks like those are also the first ones to sort of turn or pass the blame down to the people whose like love and admiration they were so desperate for. They're like the first ones to throw you under the bus. So it's like always got to be wary of that too, right? Just pro tip, just throwing it out there.
Nice pro tip. Thanks for that leadership life hack. Well, and I think that, yeah, it's this, people get caught between this like leadership and likership. Like they'd rather be liked and they're playing the mayor and just trying to make like but like, yeah, most applause, that's who wins. And yeah, I think that it's, of course, it's like hugely detrimental to whatever people are trying to do, because not only is it not great for the people you're quote unquote leading, I think it makes you a dangerous leader in that you don't know where you stand on things. So you're dangerous to everybody around you because you're going to switch the minute something changes. And now we don't know where you're coming from. And one of the best things that we can do for people is to be consistent. Now things change and even our opinions change or the plan changes with different things. And that's fine. But change based on what? Right? Like, is this a reactionary thing and just you trying to stay in the good graces of who knows who and what and where and when? Or is this like an actual, like we're adapting, right? Like when, with this group, for example, they're trying to get Murphy to the CDC lab in California. Oh, well, now there's one in Colorado. Okay, let's go there. It's not that like, we don't trust Warren anymore because she doesn't know where she's going. It's like, no, this thing changed based on new information. And so I think sometimes leaders also get scared to change their minds about some things because they don't want to be viewed as inconsistent. When in reality, if somebody has better information, you want them to use that. You don't want them to be like, still California. I get it, Colorado, and it's across the street, fine, California, right? You want them to use the information that is new and that's good. So there's that difference between being adaptable, but then also being like chaotic.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I was thinking, I was like, oh God, dead air. Oh no, look at me. So, yeah, I think, I, I also think like the extremes of this are so interesting because it's like when 10K went missing or 10K wasn't there, like the immediate thought is he's turned into a zombie, right? Like, so, and that's like huge. And so I think like average leaders don't have to deal with such extremes of like that. And so, but the subtlety for which Warren still manages those, the data change, most of the time people are not walking to California and then like, oh, we're just going to walk to Colorado, right? Like these are like such extremes. And so like, but the tactic remains the same, right? So like that good leadership can work in for minor changes and good leadership can work for like major changes. And I think like that's super interesting too. Like that's like a big piece of that. So yeah, it was a really interesting episode. It was a really interesting episode in my opinion.
I do think too with that, like, yes, we're not dealing with a zombie apocalypse and hopefully not dealing with life or death on a usual basis. But I also think that leaders do have to deal with very extreme things sometimes, right? So even if it's something like, oh, hey, we need to focus on let's say like span of control. We need to make our span of control just tighter so that there aren't all these like ones and twos. And instead, and to do that, we're going to use performance management, right? So we say that. But then if we like later are like shifting and something happens and we're like, okay, no, we actually need to like eliminate this piece of work, or we need to eliminate these positions or do this other thing, then it's like, okay, so now sure, performance management, but also like, let me like shift and focus. So I think that there's just so many things that happen in the market and things that happen within a business and all of that, that it's like, while it is not life or death, there is this pivot of that way isn't going to work anymore, or that way is going to take too long. So what is it that we can do that's realistic that, we can actually, drive this thing to get this thing done?
Yeah, I didn't even. That's true too, because I guess like life or death. Firing someone, taking away like their livelihood, or having to lay somebody off, take away their livelihood is it's a pretty heavy hit as well. So that's a good point too.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it was a good episode. And then you go into the next episode too. Wait, do you want to go to the next episode?
Yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
good. Yeah, because I think like it's a total, you're in a more like Murphy centric episode, right? He's been captured by what appears at first to be like some sort of scientist or something like that. He's in a laboratory, and the team is back to, where's Murphy, right? Trying to find Murphy. So it's become what should be the exception that's now become the norm for them, right? They're not escorting him somewhere. They're trying to find him. So it's like a very interesting sort of predicament. So I was wondering, like, I guess I have thoughts, but what are your key takeaways? What are your key thoughts that you see right off the bat?
Yeah, so there are two big things with this episode. That is the team and watching them interact, and once again, trying to find Murphy. And then there's Murphy with this collector guy who we see a lot of things here. So one of the things that stood out the most to me is this mindset of some people where they get so wrapped up in something that they become overly obsessed with it. And in this case, for this person, it was zombies. And then he started to become very obsessed with Murphy. But then he gets to this point where he kind of cracks a little bit and he's like, oh, it's not you. Like, you're not unique, but your blood is. And immediately what came to mind for me is this like professional jealousy, where people are like, oh, there's this person who is a high performer. They do all these different things. Different parts of the business want them. Other businesses want them. And then what people will do is they're like, oh, that person, like that light isn't being shined on me. And, from that person or from others. So what happens is they're like, they're not even that good. They're not even that special. Right. And so it just reminded me of this professional jealousy that we see sometimes, where it's like, but they are like, they are. And what it is that they're doing is unique. And it's just that you don't have a path to get there. That's not your skill set, or, whatever, or you're too far away from that right now to be able to touch that. It does not mean that that's not a valuable person, that that's not a valuable thing. So I would say like overarching, like I have many takeaways, but I would say overarching, that was the one that stood out the most. Just this like obsession. And then this turn to be like, you know what, you're not even that good.
Yeah, I saw it too as like that like I don't know if it's a thing, but it was like I saw him as being like the collectors being like toxic entrepreneurship. Like that was like his that was his problem, right? He was viewing everything through the lens of, how does this make my collection, my museum, my business better? And I thought that, again, I know I guess this is more synopsis, and then we can circle back to the details, but like in the end where Murphy had kind of gotten away from him to like escaped enough that he was having to hunt him down. And he was so blinded by the fact that he didn't want to be an exhibit, that Murphy did not want to be like owned, and thought it was jealousy of how successful his idea was, that he's like, I'll cut you in on the drink sales, and or you can have some of gate admission or whatever. But it was like everything that he showed, all the things he was proud of, they had a dollar amount attached to them, right? Like everything was in support of this crazy idea. And so like I think, but to the point where, like I said, he was blinded by the fact that Murphy is not a full-on zombie. He is conscious. He can talk, like he is a person for all sake of argument. Didn't matter. He was part of the collection. So it was like, that was the thing that I think was interesting the most, is like, it was very toxic, entrepreneurial. This is it. The people don't matter. The success of the people don't matter. The success of the mission, the organization matters.
Yeah, that's great, Corey. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, like to what end? And it was like, we see that in many different industries where people are going to these insane extremes for what they believe is like their end goal. People getting really hurt, people's lives being severely impacted by this just type of toxic, self-focused behavior. That's such a great point.
That was because, yeah, that was my biggest. You agreed with me, so now you took all the words out of my mouth. Because it's like,
so I just feel like I don't agree. You'd say more.
I was prepared to defend my thesis, but yeah, that was yeah, that was the big thing for me, and I really thought there was a lot of interesting sort of because the collector viewed himself as a leader, as a visionary, as like somebody who's going to be followed, somebody who's going to be admired, and like so I thought that because Murphy was like no, but then I think he also realized how shallow the guy was by just agreeing. So like the talk show, right? For air on what TV station, right? Like nothing, just but like he started to play along a little bit, and that. But I think that once the collector realized Murphy was just pandering to his like, microscopically thin ego, that's also when he got super mad. Like you'd said, it was like, oh, you're not really special, your blood's special, and just as like eliminate that guy altogether. And I thought that was like, even the science, right? He's not a scientist. He knows nothing about it. Just I can mess around, I can experiment, right? And like that's the fun. And that's that whole, to me, it's that like entrepreneurial, I'm gonna invent the next like best toaster or something, and you're reinventing a wheel that doesn't need reinventing.
That's such a great point. I think too, we see some really great team dynamics as well. And even Vasquez in this episode, I think he makes the comment that for somebody who's the mission, we lose him a lot.
Yeah.
So they're trying to find him. I mean, and Warren reiterates again, like they do all the time. Here are the resources we have, right? When they're talking about the fuel at the beginning. And then, hey, Murphy is the mission. We need to find him. We need to find him. And again, she puts those timelines on him. We need to find him by sundown. Mostly because it's going to be easier to find him in the daylight, but it's like one of those things where it then gives people something to focus on. It's not just like, oh, where is he? No, like focus up and find him. And we see a really interesting interaction because him and 10K not on the greatest of terms. And then 10K, well, they're all looking for him. But then when 10K goes into the building because he realizes that the collector guy is probably lying about not knowing where Murphy is. And so they're inside, and the collector wants Murphy to turn 10K. And so Murphy does him quite a solid there, where he just he doesn't tell 10K what he's doing. So there's that kind of like leaving a teammate in the dark, but acts like he's going to bite him when he actually, does not. It's just this big distractor for the collector. And so I think that was really interesting too, because 10K, he could have done it. And with just how Murphy is, that could have gone any way. He could have or could not have, and it would not have been in or out of character for him because he's an unknown. but he didn't. And I think that that was something that was just really interesting for that relationship, because 10K asked him not to, like begged him not to. And even though they were in this like very stressful situation, he still kind of honored that, even though it was in fact a guy's to get them out of there. He could have done it and it would have still gotten them out of there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Well, I shouldn't say, you know what I mean. I should say, what are your thoughts?
I do know what you mean. No, yeah, he didn't bite 10K.
Not in this episode.
He didn't. I thought he did, man.
He was going to bite his face. And then the collector said, no, not his face, bite his chest like you. And then that's where he goes and pretends like he's going to.
That's right. My bad. Yes. So I do agree, but and that comes, so back to your main point now that I remember the episode. I think that the 10K Murphy thing, right, was, I don't know how much 10K doesn't really care for Murphy, but he does care a lot for Doc, Warren, and everyone else. And Murphy's the mission, so keep Murphy safe, get Murphy to California. That's what he's gonna do. You know what I mean? So I think that's him putting his personal feelings aside for the betterment of the group, which is, I think, one of the best attributes of a team, and it's also one of the hardest attributes to be an effective member of the team.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. And yeah, because even when he's going and looking for him, he says, have you seen my friend? Right? Have you seen my friend? Bluish guy, all of that. So yeah, there is a point too where I care enough about you all. I agree enough. I believe in what you all are doing enough that while I'm working through this, or even if I don't agree with this, I want to be a part of this group. I like that.
Yeah, it's a really good episode, you know? I really think so.
I think we say that about all of the episodes because, spoiler alert, they're all good.
They are. Yeah, I'm gonna stop saying that. I'm just gonna start saying terrible episode.
This episode, just say something different every time, like 2 thumbs up, 5 stars.